Well, we've looked at some of the hard sciences, and we looked at physics, we looked at evolution, looked at the possibility that we may be living in an illusion or a simulation of some kind, and now we're going to move on to focus slightly more on aspects of consciousness at the frontier. Physics, consciousness and reality, Dickie Dredd and Nigel Adams. This is part 17 in the video series, and we're now on to chapter 3, Consciousness at the Frontier. So chapter 3 marks a turning point. Having moved from physics to perception, we now step directly into the terrain where consciousness itself becomes the focus. The chapter begins with psychedelics, long regarded as tools for breaking down the walls of ordinary awareness. They are explored both in modern research and shamanistic traditions, where altered states have been part of healing and ritual for centuries. This opens the question of whether extraordinary experiences can tell us something fundamental about the mind. The discussion then widens to the mathematics of visionary states and the suggestion that consciousness may not be a late arrival in evolution, but something woven into the fabric of reality. Here the chapter surveys both scientific and philosophical theories that treat awareness not as a side effect, but as basic to existence. Artificial intelligence provides another lens. Machines that simulate thought invite us to ask whether genuine awareness could ever emerge in silicon. Part 1 on AI explores the practical lessons from AI research, while Part 2 reflects on what the attempt reveals about our cognition. Together they highlight how close or how far technology is from anything like experience. Questions of identity and survival follow. Cloning challenges the idea of individuality. If a copy of you were made, would it share your consciousness, or would it be someone new? Digital immortality pushes this further. Could uploading the mind preserve the self, or would it only create a ghostly echo? Biological immortality, meanwhile, asks whether flesh itself could be pushed beyond its limits, and what such extensions would mean for being human. The chapter also moves beyond humanity altogether. Animals, artificial systems, and even ecosystems are considered as possible sites of consciousness, suggesting that awareness may not be confined to the human brain. This leads to the deep question of what qualifies as life, and whether our current definitions are too narrow. Towards its close, the chapter turns to methods of measuring consciousness, from neuroscientific models to information-based theories. It also introduces duality and non-duality, two ways of seeing reality that differ radically on whether the self and the world are separate or one. By the end, consciousness is revealed as a frontier in every sense, scientific, philosophical and personal. It is where technology, spirituality and biology collide, and where our most basic assumptions about self and reality are challenged. Rather than closing questions down, the chapter opens them wider, suggesting that consciousness may be the deepest mystery we face, and that one that refuses to be ignored. So chapter 3, Consciousness at the Frontier. We've been told that psychedelics are just drugs that make people hallucinate. But is it as simple as that? Across cultures, generations and completely different belief systems, people keep reporting the same thing. The feeling that reality itself has changed. Not just colours, not just emotion, space bends, time stretches. The boundary between self and world starts to dissolve. And the disturbing part is this. Sometimes those experiences feel more real than ordinary life. If the brain can completely transform reality with chemistry alone, how do you know your normal perception was accurate to begin with? So section 14 in the book, Psychedelics, opening the doors of perception. Few things stir debate like psychedelic drugs. To some they're dangerous delusions, chemical traps for the unwary. To others they're sacred tools, ancient keys to the doors of perception. The truth is probably tangled somewhere in the middle. But one thing is clear, psychedelics have the unique ability to shake up how we experience reality itself. When people take substances like LSD, psilocybin, which is the active chemical in magic mushrooms, ayahuasca or DMT, they often report not just visual distortions or hallucinations, but a wholesale change in the structure of experience. time can stretch or vanish. Boundaries between self and world can dissolve. Emotions, memories and insights come roaring up from the depths. For many, there's a deep conviction that what they see isn't just fantasy, but a glimpse of something more real than everyday life. Aldous Huxley, after his first mescaline trip, called it the doors of perception being flung open. Neuroscience has begun to explore this in earnest, and the results are fascinating. You might expect that psychedelics light up the brain. More colours, more thoughts, more visions. But scans show the opposite. Drugs like psilocybin and LSD actually decrease brain activity, particularly in the default mode network, the set of brain regions tied to self, ego, and the internal chatter. When this system quiets down, the rest of the brain becomes more interconnected, more fluid. Different regions that don't normally talk start sharing signals. The result is a state of loosened boundaries, freer, more open field of consciousness. Some also purport to psychedelic drugs causing what is coined synesthesia, a neurological condition where stimulation of one sense ultimately triggers another. And I've had that myself. I've seen colours and heard colours and seen sounds. There is, however, little evidence of this. What makes sense of the reports of ego dissolution? The sense of being a separate self is, in part, a construction of the default mode network. Switch that off, and you can feel like you've merged with the universe, dissolved into oneness or touched some deeper level of being. Whether this is true reality or just another altered filter is up for debate, but the feeling is profound. There's also the therapeutic angle. Modern research has shown psychedelics can have huge potential for treating depression, PTSD and addiction. By loosening the rigid patterns of brain activity, they allow people to break out the stuck habits of thought. One dose in a supported setting can have effects lasting months. It's not just a magic bullet, but it shows how deeply our sense of reality is tied to brain processes and how easily those processes can be shifted. On the flip side, psychedelics are unpredictable. They can bring bliss, healing and insight, but also terror, confusion and psychological destabilisation. And I've had terror. Context matters. Set and setting. Your mindset and the environment you're in can shape the trip as much as the chemical itself. That's why many traditional cultures wrap psychedelic use in ritual guidance and respect. Sorry, let the bloody RAF go over. Philosophically, psychedelics raise a huge question. If our ordinary sense of reality is just one filtered view, a survival interface, as evolutionary game theory suggests, then maybe psychedelics temporarily loosen the filter, letting more of the raw data seep through. Or maybe they don't reveal reality, but scramble the filter so wildly that the brain starts generating new illusions. Either way, they make clear that reality isn't fixed, it's negotiable. Some physicists and philosophers have even suggested that psychedelics could be tools for exploring consciousness itself, same way telescopes are tools for exploring space. That's still speculative and difficult to square with the demands of rigorous science, but at the very least they show us that the world we take as normal is just one construction among many. So, are psychedelics glimpses of true reality? Or just beautiful, terrifying tricks of a brain under chemical stress? Or the same reality seen through a different filter, the way humans and bees perceive our tree differently? Maybe all three. What's certain is that they remind us of something science often forgets, that consciousness isn't fixed. The mind is a shapeshifter, and under the right conditions, reality itself can seem to turn upside down. Perception may not be a passive window onto reality at all. It may be something constructed, filtered, stabilised, and edited by the brain every second of our lives. And if that's true, then psychedelics might not simply create illusion. They might expose how fragile ordinary reality already is. Which means the problem isn't just whether altered states are trustworthy. It might be whether everyday consciousness is as reliable as we assume. And if that's the case, what if sobriety itself is only one version of reality among many? Next up, we're still on chapter 3. We go to consciousness at the frontier. And we're on to section 15, shamanistic practices with psychedelics.